Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Scott Selections here with Statsalt.com for Sunday, March 31st. Just a quick recap of what happened yesterday. We got another loss, three in a row. Not happy about it. If you actually watched any of the Astros game, as we had the Astros money line against the Tampa Bay Rays, I still have no idea how the Astros only scored one run. I really thought they'd win the game outright. Glasnow pitched out of trouble. He got into a lot of trouble as he gave up roughly 6 hits in the first 5 innings, and yet the Astros continued to strand people on base, stranded about 8 people on base in the first 8 innings, while the Rays only stranded about 3 for the first 7 innings. McHugh pitched really well for the Astros. The Rays barely got anybody on base the entirety of the game, but yet the Rays were able to deliver on the big hits. And the Astros just continuously left the men in scoring position. So we will bounce back. Don't worry about it. As of right now, our record. See, even though we've lost 3 straight, we're on pretty good standing, as we are 13-7-1, and we are still up 4.7 units. So we can live with this little bad stretch we're on, as we will look forward to providing you more winners in the future. Hey Jeff, hey Big X, nice to see both of you. But for today, as you can tell by the title of this video, we do not currently have any play of the day. I thought that, especially since we're currently in the middle of a little bit of a slump, that we shouldn't force any given plays. However, I do have some very strong leans that I thought were going to be considered play of the day, but in the end, I just decided to only consider them leans. I will be doing my MLB Twitter play of the day, which also lost yesterday. Another one of those examples where it just seems like everything that we've put out recently in the last couple of days has not really worked out, as we ended up recommending the Indians over 1.5 runs in the first 5 innings against Jake Odorizzi. And Odorizzi, average pitcher in his entire career, decides to go 6 innings, 1 run, career high 11 strikeouts. So, it happens. They got 1 run. They weren't able to get 2 across the board, but we will end up bouncing back on this Sunday. But as the title of the video suggests, we are going to just move forward, as I will be giving my leans on the 2 Elite 8 matchups today, as well as the baseball matchups today, which is, again, why this video is coming out in the early morning. Now, just a reminder, if any of you have any questions with regard to specific games today, or how I handicap games personally, then don't be afraid to share them in the comments section. I'll gladly get to them whenever I have the time. But without further ado, let's start with the baseball games for today. First game, we have the Orioles and the Yankees at about 1 o'clock between Bundy and J.A. Happ. Yesterday, we got that game completely right, where I recommended taking the Orioles in some type of alternative run line at either +2.5 or +3.5. Paxton pitched a lot better than I thought he would, but the Orioles were able to win the game. As the Yankees, even though the fact that the Orioles are the worst team in baseball, in my opinion, it's either them or the Marlins, the Yankees have always struggled dealing with Baltimore with regard to sweeps, and I'm not surprised that Baltimore was able to win 1 out of these 3 potential games. As for this game, I lean to the Yankees and the Yankees -1.5. I think after yesterday, the Yankees are going to be furious, and I think that J.A. Happ will pitch well against the Orioles here. While Bundy, he has talent, he has arm talent, but he's extremely inconsistent. I think the Yankees lineup woke up towards the latter half of that game yesterday, and I think the Yankees will be able to win this game by multiple runs, so I lean to the Yankees by margin in this one. Moving on, the Tigers, you have Matt Moore, a longtime pitching journeyman, versus Trent Thornton. For this game, a lot of money's coming on Toronto. I completely agree with it. Matt Moore is way past his prime. I don't even know if he should be in the league at this point. I would have to lean towards the Blue Jays in that game. Big X, I'll get to that game in a second when I talk about NBA, but I will cover that game as well. Moving on, you have Pittsburgh versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati currently a -126, according to Covers.com. You have Trevor Williams versus Sonny Gray. I lean towards Pittsburgh money line in this game, as I agree that Cincinnati, I think, is the better team, especially with the acquisitions of Puig and Kemp during the offseason, but I just don't trust Sonny Gray. As a Yankees fan, I was not impressed with what I saw from him in the last couple of years. I think Sonny Gray had his peak years in Oakland. I don't think he's going to figure it out again with this Cincinnati staff. So I will be going with Pittsburgh on the money line in that game. How's it going, Hank? Thanks for joining us. Moving on, you have the Astros versus Tampa. I don't really know what's going on with Houston right now. I know that they're 1-2 and it's early on in the season, but this they just can't generate runs like they used to be able to, at least in the early part of the season. They did lose some key players in the offseason, a la Marwin Gonzalez, who ended up leaving for Minnesota. But overall, Houston, I have to expect their lineup to get going. You have Miley versus Chirinos. I'm not a big fan of Chirinos, still a relative youngster. And I think that Houston will not lose 3 out of 4 in this series. I will be leaning towards the Astros at this very small plus price. Moving on, you have the Rockies versus the Marlins with John Gray versus Sandy Alcantara. For this game, I will be leaning towards the Rockies. I know the Rockies lost yesterday as the Marlins picked up the first win of the season. This Marlins team isn't very good. I think everybody knows that. This team had one of the lowest win totals in the league entering the season. And John Gray has been very hit or miss, but he has had a lot of experience with this Rockies team. I think that the Rockies will be able to get the job done. Arenado's been relatively quiet so far. Still batting at around 300, but still he hasn't had any huge hits. It wouldn't surprise me to see him perform well in this one with a multiple hit game, as the Rockies end up winning this game outright. As for the spread, at 7.5, I have to lean under just because of the fact that it's Marlins Park and the Marlins will not be able to generate runs on a consistent basis. But Gray has had issues with his control, so I will be looking towards the Rockies in that game. Richmond, I'm going to get to that also, but I think we're on the same page in that game. Next game is between the Mets and the Nationals. In that game yesterday, both pitchers between Syndergaard and Strasburg both simultaneously forgot how to pitch, as you had roughly 19 runs in that game when the total was about 7.5. But in this game, you have Wheeler versus Corbin. A lot of money's come in on the Nationals. I have to lean towards the Nationals in this one. Corbin got paid a boatload of money after a great season last year just to come to Washington. Wheeler is very hit or miss, especially after all the arm injuries he's had. I'm not really sure what his current status is in terms of his arm talent. I know it's still there, but I have to wonder about his control. Overall, I have to lean towards Washington. I'm not going to – it's very tough for any team in baseball to sweep another team, especially on the road. I think Washington will be able to get a win here to avoid the sweep in this one, so I will be leaning towards the Nationals, which according to Covers.com is at roughly 152 on the minus on the Nationals. But I see a 147 available at 5 dimes, so I'd lean there. Moving on, the next game, we're looking at the Indians and the Twins. You have Carrasco versus Pineda. Money's coming on Minnesota. I have to lean towards the Indians. I know they won yesterday. I know that their offense hasn't done anything. Pineda's coming off a serious arm injury. He hasn't pitched in a long time. And he also hasn't pitched that often in this Minnesota Twins ballpark, as he was a Yankee for almost the entirety of his career. As for the Indians, Carrasco's a tremendous pitcher. He's pitched against the Twins multiple times before. I think that the Indians definitely have a significant advantage on the mound. And as for lineups, I do think Minnesota's lineup is better at this point in time due to the injury to Francisco Lindor, which will be keeping him sidelined for a couple of days. How's it going, Thomas? Thanks for joining us. But for this game, I will be leaning towards the Indians because I don't really trust Pineda off of a serious arm injury in this game. Moving on, you have the Cardinals versus the Brewers in a battle between Waka and Corbin Burns. I have to lean toward the Cardinals here. Cardinals are 1-2, but Waka's been starting for multiple years. Burns was a rookie last year out of the bullpen. Now he's expected to provide serious innings as he's now been shifted into the starting lineup due to the Brewers' lack of starting pitching. I think this game will be close. This whole series has been relatively nuts as both teams have gotten off the leads in every game and proceed to almost blow the lead every time. But Goldschmidt came alive earlier in the series with that 3-home run game. I think the Cardinals behind Waka will do enough to get the win in this one. Lean to the Cardinals in that game. Moving on, you have the White Sox and the Kansas City Royals. You have a battle between Giolito versus Lopez in this game. I have to lean to the White Sox just because of the fact that I don't think the Royals are a good enough team to pull off a sweep on anybody. I know the White Sox have struggled earlier on. I know that the Royals have looked good in the first 2 games, but overall, this Royals team is one of the worst teams in baseball. They will probably win less than 70 games by the end of the season. Oh, sorry. As for the over-unders on those games, I'd lean towards the over in the Mets game. I'd lean towards the over in the Indians game, and I'd also lean towards the over in the Cardinals game in that one. But as for the White Sox and the Royals, I just lean to the White Sox. I wouldn't be surprised to see Kansas City lose one here. I don't think Kansas City is a good enough team to be sweeping other teams in the basement on a regular basis. Giolito's had experience. I think he'll be able to do enough for the White Sox to get a win in this game. And as for the total, money's coming on the under. It's at over 8 instead of 9 now. I have to lean towards the over, especially with the White Sox bullpen. Royals bullpen's decent, but I don't really trust Lopez in this game. Giolito's okay, but he should be giving up a couple of runs. I lean towards the over 8 and the White Sox winning that game at a small plus price. Moving on, as for one of the marquee games, how's it going, Jerry? Thanks for joining us. As for the marquee games, or one of them in baseball today, you have the Cubs versus the Texas Rangers. And this was actually close to being one of the premium plays, to being the pick of the day. This actually might be my MLB Twitter pick of the day. But in this Cubs game versus the Rangers, the Cubs originally were at minus 155. They're down all the way to minus 125 or 123 at Pinnacle. And the total has taken a drop from 9.5 to 8.5. I don't really get the logic for the drop in the total. How's it going, Peter? Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. In terms of the actual total in that game, I don't really get the under money. I'm leaning towards just the Cubs and the over in this game. The Rangers, I should say, did a great job rallying yesterday, led by that large come-from-behind win by Joey Gallo's 3-run home run late in that game. But in terms of the actual talent on both teams, the Cubs are a significantly better team. I chalk up the Cubs' struggles yesterday to Darvish's inability to find the strike zone, his first game off of a serious arm injury, where he walked 7 batters in roughly 3 innings. And you can't have any success when your starting pitcher can't find the strike zone. As for the Cubs, Cole Hamels is the ace of the squad. I know Lester's there, but the Cubs traded a lot of key pieces to get Hamels. And Hamels spent a decent portion of his career with the Rangers, so he's very familiar with that ballpark in Arlington. While Lance Lynn, new to the Rangers after spending last year with the Yankees, his numbers against the Cubs in recent years are also terrible. I lean towards the Cubs in that game. I don't really understand the money that's come in on the Cubs, and I also don't really understand the money that's come in on the under, especially with the wind blowing out to right field slightly at roughly 12 miles an hour. I think that the Cubs will win this game, and I think there will be runs in this game. This probably will be my MLB Twitter play of the day, which I will be keeping despite the lack of a pick of the day. But I will be leaning towards the Cubs in that game. The main pick yesterday, the one lost as we had the Astros winning against the Tampa Bay Rays. They left a lot of people on base. They kept getting runners in scoring position. They just couldn't generate enough offense to actually get them in. As for my personal plays, I had the Phillies minus 1.5 and the under 8 in the Giants game. So I ended up salvaging something out of yesterday. But in terms of our pick of the day, the Astros just simply only scored 1 run against Tyler Glasnow, and I'm still not really sure how that exactly happened. But that's the past. We're moving on here just for the future. Next, we have the Angels in Oakland between Skaggs and Montes. I would lean towards the A's. Skaggs has the talent to be good, but his stuff isn't fully dynamic. And I think that Oakland got its offense going yesterday. I think that Oakland will be able to ride that brief momentum. I don't think this Angels team is that good. I know Trout's a great player, and I understand that, but Pujols is way past his prime. And right now, he's just a bunch of dead money on that Angels roster. Not the player he used to be. Plus, if he hits it anywhere in the infield, is a guaranteed double play. I'm leaning towards Oakland. I think Oakland's a better team. I think Oakland has a better bullpen. And I think the starters are a relative wash. I would take Oakland in that game and a lean towards the over. Moving on, you have the Red Sox and the Mariners. Mariners got another win yesterday. In this matchup, you have Porcello versus LeBlanc, as the Red Sox are favored in this game. As for this game, I don't really have much in terms of leans. I lean towards the Red Sox, even though they're at a minus 140 something price, behind Porcello, who won an AL Cy Young a couple of years ago. LeBlanc's a very contact-based pitcher. His stuff isn't dynamic, but his control is fantastic. And I think that anytime you're pitching contact-wise to the Red Sox, is a dangerous game to play. But, Kyle, to answer your question, that's a very good question. In April, a lot of people don't really know what to expect from any given team, kind of like in any given sport with the exception of maybe the NBA, where you're going into a season, you're assuming Team X is going to be competing for a division title, so they're automatically going to work out. It's not exactly how it works, because in baseball with the 162-game season, perfect example is the Indians last year. The Indians last year won the division, which everybody knew would happen in the AL Central, because of the fact that the rest of the division is terrible. However, people were betting on the Indians earlier in the year because of their talent, and they were awful in the beginning of the year before they found some chemistry. So overall, I'd say that in terms of the beginning of the season, there is a lot of money to be made on dogs. As first off, 162 games, even in teams that are significantly better than opponents, the odds of sweeps in the MLB aren't as high as people actually think that they are, because conceptually playing the same team 3 or 4 times in a row, the other team's got to win one eventually. That's why for dogs, I highly recommend trying to bet against sweeps when you have the opportunity. Where, for example, the Nationals game today, for example. Is it possible to sweep teams? Yes, it is. But in terms of the likelihood of a team winning 3 in a row against a team that's either on their level or a little bit superior or even a little bit worse is relatively slim. So with regard to dogs in the early months, a lot of teams are still trying to find their identity. Coaches are still tinkering with the bullpen, trying to find out which players they actually trust late in games. There are a lot of value on underdogs in the upcoming months because I think that the public will just bet on team names instead of focusing on the actual rosters, as well as how the manager is using those respective players. Another example is just some players starting out with a slump. I know that just an example from earlier today that I saw yesterday when I was writing one of the articles for the game today was Sterling Castro with the Marlins. Is he an outstanding player? No. He's a career roughly 260 hitter, but right now he's batting 143. Is he going to stay batting 143? No. He's going to pick it up, but the Marlins have no offense and they need him to perform well. So when he's not, the team can't really score many runs. So just another example of some batters in particular, some pitchers might get off the slow starts, which will cause the line to be priced higher than it should be. Overall, I think that there are a lot of money to be made on dogs in the early months of the season, as well as the entire season. But as people start to figure out how good teams actually are, that's when you start to lose a little bit of value. But in terms of the Red Sox and Mariners game, I think the Mariners are a good example of that. The Mariners are currently 4-1. They've been an underdog, in my opinion. I'm pretty sure in every game that they've been in, they've been an underdog, and yet they've cashed 4 of the 5 tickets. And for this game, they're an underdog again. I'd still lean towards the Red Sox, but I would definitely lean towards the over 8.5 in the Red Sox-Mariners game. This Mariners lineup has performed extremely well so far this season, and LeBlanc thrives on contact-based outs, and I think that the Red Sox have the lineup depth in order to generate 4 or 5 runs in this game. I lean to the over 8.5. Going to be getting to the Philly game. Moving on, you have the Giants and the Padres. You have Samardzija versus Chris Paddock. In this game, in terms of the actual money line, I think this is a good example where I have no idea why the Padres are favored by this much, or roughly 158. I know the Giants won yesterday. Padres have a better team. Samardzija struggled last year due to arm issues, but he's definitely the more talented pitcher between him and Chris Paddock, who, as I look at his he's still a relative youngster. Nobody really knows what to expect in this game. I think the Padres are favored by too much. Lean towards the Giants, and I'd lean towards the over 7.5 in this game, as Samardzija has a tendency to be wild, and Chris Paddock, nobody knows what to expect. Moving on, you have the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers. Between Buehler and Weaver, I would lean towards the over 7.5. Buehler is a tremendous pitcher, but I don't feel comfortable laying 220 with the Dodgers in this game. Luke Weaver, first game with the Diamondbacks after switching teams. I would lean towards the over in that one. And a lot of questions with regard to the Phillies game between Jake Arrieta and Kyle Wright. I'm not the biggest fan of betting on sweeps, but I would have to lean to Philly, especially with the way that Harper absolutely annihilated that ball roughly 465 feet yesterday. Yeah, I don't get the line either. I think the line has to do with the fact that just the overall talent of the Padres lineup is significantly better than the Giants lineup. But Paddock's a youngster, hasn't even pitched in AAA, according to Kyle. And I think that there's a lot of value on the Giants in that game. Lean towards the Giants' money line in that game, especially with the fact that both bullpens are both equally terrible. So even if the Giants are losing, the Padres bullpen is definitely weak, and I would not be surprised to see Posey, Belt, and Crawford potentially put up some damage in the later innings, as the Giants will be looking to split this opening 4-game series. But with the Phillies and the Braves, David Robertson almost gave me a heart attack yesterday with the -1.5, and then up 8-4 in the last inning. Robertson gave up 2 runs, and I had to see Freddie Freeman come to the dish along with Acuna. I think before they ended up winning by 2 runs. I have to lean Philly. So far, Philly's lineup and their acquisitions have looked extremely solid. Real Muto homered yesterday. Harper homered yesterday. And Hoskins is fantastic. I think he's going to be a very underrated cornerstone of that franchise for many years to come. Atlanta has a great roster, but I don't trust Kyle Wright at all. And Arrieta, he was a little bit underwhelming last year, but in terms of talent, everybody knows he's the significantly better pitcher in this game. I would lean towards the Phillies in that game. Now moving on to the college basketball games. There are 2 games today after a very thrilling 2 games yesterday. Overall, every game so far in the Elite Eight has been extremely close, with the exception of the Auburn and Carolina game, where Auburn blew them out, and Auburn is playing again today. Kentucky is currently favored by 4.5. This was almost the pick of the day. I was going to pick Kentucky -4.5. Most of the money's coming on Auburn. I don't really get it. Kentucky's beaten this team twice already this season, and now Auburn's going to be without Okeke for the rest of the year as he tore his ACL in a very upsetting turn of events for the Auburn Tigers in the second half of that North Carolina game. Kentucky's the better team, especially with P.J. Washington back, who looked good in his first game against Houston. But Auburn has already lost to this team twice with Okeke. Okeke put up double digits in both matchups against Kentucky in the regular season, and now he's out. Auburn's going to live and die by the 3, which is why I'm a little bit hesitant to call this a play of the day, because Auburn has the ability to get hot from the perimeter and to cover the spread. Plus, Kentucky's also struggled winning by margin this tournament. Barely beat Houston, barely beat Wofford. But overall, I'd have to lean to Kentucky in this game at -4.5, with the Auburn losing one of its key players. I think Kentucky will cover. I think this will be close. If you want to know, in my opinion, I think a better line would be the first half, as Auburn should be struggling moving some pieces around, using lineups they're not accustomed to using with the absence of Okeke, as the team will have to adjust on the fly, so to speak. And as for the total, it went from 144.5 to 142.5. I'll actually lean to the over in that game. I know that Kentucky's been an under team all season long, including this tournament, but Auburn needs to push the pace in order to win. And even with Okeke out, Auburn will continue to use their 3-point dependent guards to push the pace. I think Kentucky has the length to generate problems on the boards for offensive rebounds and second chances. Lean towards Kentucky -4.5 and the over 142.5. And as for Michigan State versus Duke, lean towards the under in this game at 151, especially with the current status of Cam Reddish, who, even if he does play, is not going to be at 100%. And the fact that the Michigan State Spartans have played tremendous defense in recent games, particularly against Minnesota as well as against LSU. This defense is dialed in right now. And as for the spread of this game, Duke's favored by 2. I'd have to lean Michigan State. I think Duke got relatively lucky to get past UCF and Virginia Tech, and Michigan State is a very solid team, especially with the potential absence of Cam Reddish. I don't think Duke has enough firepower. I think Michigan State will force Duke to hit outside shots. And although Trey Jones hit those in the second half against Virginia Tech, I cannot see that being sustainable. So I will be leaning towards Kentucky and Michigan State in the games today, as well as the unders on both. In terms of the games yesterday, I thought the games were fantastic yesterday. That Virginia-Purdue game was one of the best games in recent memory for me with tournaments. People were overreacting, saying one of the best games of all time. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. Anytime you have a buzzer beater, it's always a better game. But Carson Edwards, I'll tell you what, even though they didn't win and he turned the ball over late in that game, that was one of the best NCAA tournament performances I've ever seen, as I've never seen a player will his team to a potential victory that way. Carson Edwards definitely did a lot for his stock. It's one of those situations where even though his team is going home, I thought Purdue as a whole played terribly with the exception of Edwards. If Edwards just struggled a little bit more, I think Purdue would have lost by double digits. That whole team did not look ready to play, but Edwards had to put the team on his back. Just reading some of the comments here, I agree with the one here. I think there's a lot of value on that Cubs-Rangers over 12.5, and I really like that 12.5 line because of the fact that you have a potential extra innings draw at a hypothetical 6-6, which is something to keep in mind anytime you are betting games. If you get an even number, you always have a shot at the over in extra innings. As for the Auburn, I thought about giving it out as a play today, but Auburn could be playing with a ton of emotional, edge based on the fact that Okiki is down and they're going to try to win this game for their fallen, comrade. But it's also very tough to beat a team 3 times in any given year. I think Kentucky's able to do it, and I think that Kentucky will end up winning this game by roughly 8 or 9. But Kentucky's had the issue of choking with regard to point spread covers in the second half of games. They were able to cover against Wofford, and they were able to cover against Houston. Both of those by last-minute covers. I don't know if I trust Kentucky laying any type of margin in this game, but I would lean towards Kentucky. And I'm not really going to cover NBA, but somebody did ask before my thoughts on the San Antonio Spurs versus Sacramento Kings. The Kings played last night as Harden had a 50-point triple-double and torched that Kings defense. The Kings have officially been eliminated from playoff contention, where the Spurs are going to be in the playoffs again, and they're trying to fight for an improved seeding, especially with the way that the Clippers have been surging lately. So I will be leaning towards the Spurs. Money, it originally was at 8.5. It came up to 10 in most spots, but it's still available at 9.5 at Pinnacle at roughly minus 113. Lean to the Spurs in that game. Now, Jeff, what do I think of Virginia covering? I think that since I've lost 3 straight games, there's a little bit of reassurance knowing that people have had it worse than I've had it in the last couple of days. I think that if you had Purdue plus 4.5, you should seriously contemplate retirement. That is one of the worst beats I've seen in a long time, especially with the fact that Virginia didn't even need to make the second free throw on that. I thought they might miss it on purpose, if I'm being honest. Up 4 with a second to go, you might as well just miss the thing and force Purdue to go to the length. Didn't really matter. Purdue not covering there is absolutely brutal, and that's just a true sign of how accurate the Vegas line makers are. You know that if you watch ESPN, that will be coming up on SVP's Bad Beats on Monday, as that beat was absolutely brutal. But no, my actual thoughts, if you had Purdue plus 4.5, you should probably take a week off, take a vacation, find something better to do temporarily, because you're not going to be able to live that down. And similar to what happened today, as for the pick of the day, I do not have a pick of the day, but my main leans of the day are going to be on Kentucky, as well as the MLB play of the day, which will be on my Twitter. But as for my lean of the day, I lean towards Kentucky. I wanted to make it a play of the day, but at the same point, after Auburn destroyed all my hopes and dreams against North Carolina yesterday, I've seen what this offense is capable of. So I don't feel confident putting it as a play of the day, but I definitely think Kentucky will be able to get the job done. But overall, that's going to do it for this installment of Scott Selections. I'm very happy that this weekend as a whole even though we've lost the last 3 games, in terms of being a sports fan, the actual games this past weekend have been fantastic in pretty much every sport. So as a sports fan, it's a great time of year, especially with baseball season finally upon us. I was shocked when I found out that Auburn was actually getting the majority of the money in this game. I thought that most people would be on Kentucky, but I would lean towards Kentucky in that game. Yeah, I think that makes sense, Scotty. I think it could really go either way. In terms of the over in the first half, the one I'm not really sure if I'm a big fan of that play because I don't know how messed up Auburn's offense will be without one of its key contributors. They might look a little bit sloppy early on trying to use a lineup that they're not used to running. I think Kentucky first half spread makes a lot of sense. In terms of the over, that over is a little bit low, but Kentucky has played a lot slower and a lot more methodical earlier throughout this entire tournament. So I would be a little bit hesitant towards the over. I mostly like the over because I think if this game's close towards the end, Auburn will chuck up a ton of threes and they'll foul down the stretch. So I'd lean to the over in that game. Yep, thanks for joining us, everybody. We will look forward to providing you with more picks of the day in the future. And stay tuned to my Twitter as we will be posting another MLB pick of the day on there in roughly about 10 minutes. But until then, have a good day, everybody.